Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast. A reminder that this podcast is not medical advice. Our intention for today's episode is for you to become more aware of your capacity for experiencing delight.
We hope you'll discover that experiencing delight is one of life's joys and as part of living into a variety of experiences. That you can choose to live a lighthearted life, learn it, and practice it, mindfully knowing all the while that it won't all be fun and delightful, and it isn't supposed to be.
We hope that during this episode, you will notice when delight might be possible, when it is present, and how to lean into the experience. We hope also to help you use mindfulness to reduce any suffering that might come related to the clinging or attachment to experiencing delight.
So we wanted to start with the definition of delight and the why of this podcast, realizing that there is so much delight available in the world, and yet we miss out on it and don't create it and enjoy it and hold on to it and notice it. And then maybe when we do create it and notice it and enjoy it, we hold on to it and grasp it. So this idea of delight in our lives and the role that it can play if we choose. So the definition of delight is great pleasure, joy, or rapture when I looked it up. And I actually truly love the word delight, but I think it's helpful when we're thinking about a word and thinking about an emotion that's so powerful and can be so influential in our lives to look at what that word is and what it means. And realizing that this word delight is actually quite different from words, say, happy or fun. And noticing once again the importance of the word you choose. And when you choose an intention, to be very specific and intentional in your word choice. So I like to think of delight as actually delightful. There's light in it, and it's lighthearted. It's also in the moment, magical, one of my favorite words, and there's no judgment in delight. So the thought of bringing it into a podcast on mindfulness is just that. It's being in the moment, it's light, and there's no judgment involved.
So we're going to share now some moments of delight in our lives. I like to harken back to anytime I'm out on the water paddleboarding as one main way for me to notice delight. Simply noticing the sensations of the water atop my feet or the vast expanse of whatever body of water that I happen to be paddleboarding on. All of that brings an ease to my body in a way that is light and fun and exciting. And I find that being on my paddleboard is truly delightful for me. What about you, Jessie?
So interesting that being on your paddleboard, you have to be light because it's very buoyant and up. It just immediately comes to this light. And your delight came from stillness, which is the opposite of my delight. It just struck me when you mentioned that. So when I tried to think of like what moments in life are really, truly delightful, and the one that pops into my mind is on a ski trip a few years ago. I was with my son who was totally into snowboarding at the time. And he likes to snowboard in the fresh powder before anyone else gets there. And so he would get up, he had to be the first one there, and we had to be the first one in the untracked snow, I guess you call it. And I have this just like intense memory, and it's deep. It's like a physical moment of delight. And so I do think delight is something where you're just there's no control, there's no like focus on it. It's just there. And so it was skiing in that, I call it whipped cream powder. And once again, you feel light, like you're just lifted up. And for me, it was a moment of movement. And so a lot of my delight and good feeling actually comes when I'm moving, my body is moving, or I'm moving in space and time. And I think that's because when I'm truly in delight, I get out of my head. I'm not thinking about it. I'm literally in the moment enjoying it. And so in that moment, it was actually somewhat of a moment of being like out of control and in control. I wasn't out of control and that I was going to crash, but that it was all just going and loving and enjoying and truly being just in that one moment of all the things that I love, like being with my child, being in nature, moving, and something about just the joy. There is joy in not being in control. I think a lot of where we struggle to find delight is that we're trying to make it happen, and we're trying to consciously grasp onto it and hold it. And in that moment, there was no holding on to anything. You're just going. So that's my thought about delight.
And how interesting to compare and contrast our examples of delight in terms of yours is in motion, mine is more with stillness. So delight can be experienced with or without movement. And it can also be experienced with or without adrenaline or endorphins.
The other thought is with or without paying attention too closely, because in my moment that pops to mind of true delight, I was not paying attention. It was just a lived moment. And in yours, my sense is that you were paying attention. And that's a lot of where the delight comes from, was the attention focus and noticing and enjoying. And I can think of moments of delight where that happens too. So it can happen in both spaces if you're willing to let it and allow it. One other thought about delight is that a lot of people may think that it's indulgent to find delight or indulgent to focus on fun. And especially in difficult times in the world and in our lives, that bringing in delight or fun or joy is not necessarily what we should be doing. But I think it's important to acknowledge that delight is important for our health. It's important for balance and having all ends of a full spectrum life. And it's really a key component of a life better lived. The other thing that I think is important as we talk about being mindful of delight, that life is not supposed to be all delight either. It's not supposed to be all fun. And that this thought actually gets many of us into trouble. We talk about grasping onto delightful experiences and holding on to them, not wanting to let them go. Or I see it with a lot of people being disappointed, so that we think that a weekend should be all fun and full of delight, or a vacation or a holiday or a celebration, and realizing that life is a balance of two different polar opposites. And that when we just allow for delight and allow for disappointment and allow for beauty and not beauty, that is the true sort of color of life.
Various writers, scholars have written about basically needing to see, feel, be in darkness in order to see or feel or experience the light. And the light is understood because of darkness. So I wanted to go a little bit into my own darkness, what a lot of my life experiences since have been somewhat compared and contrasted to. And for me, that was my year of cancer treatment back in 2011. And incidentally, I'm delighted to say that my 10-year cancerversary, the 10-year anniversary of the date of my diagnosis, just passed earlier this month. And that day was an excellent opportunity for me to notice delight, and yet concurrently hold at the same time and be reminded of the darkness that I had lived through within the uncertainty, and that I had survived. So coming out of cancer treatment and taking my first mindfulness-based stress reduction course more than 10 years ago now, during one of the first guided practices about reasons for why we as participants were there, I distinctly remember one of my reasons was so I could give myself permission to be happy again. There's this concept of foreboding joy that I had a lot of difficulty with coming out of cancer treatment, that if I let my guard down, if I was too happy or life was going too well, that it might somehow jinx the future in setting circumstances up for a downturn or some unpleasant event happening. Kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop, and how the waiting for the other shoe to drop really prevented me from being able to notice and experience delight. And I think that in retrospect, talking about this podcast topic, I've really been working with that, working with foreboding joy, letting go gradually of that fear and uncertainty for the better part of the last 10 years. It's a work in progress, but I've definitely noticed that I'm better able to experience and notice delight when it comes up and not be afraid of it or wanting myself to hold back on the experience of delight because some bad thing might happen in the future.
I think that's such a shared lived experience. And I know for myself, having lived through my husband's mental health issues a few years ago, and I work with many people who are always waiting, like, what would happen if it came back? What would happen if this problem happens? And so this idea that we have to be ever vigilant to prevent something, and yet we miss all of the time. Up until that thing happens, we miss the delight in the time, but that somehow our willingness to engage and enjoy and give ourselves permission to have delight would cause something bad to happen. And I remember I don't know where I heard this, but it was the idea that if 10 years from now you got colon cancer, for example, would you wish that you had been worrying about it now? Because I think we often spend all this time waiting for the shoe to drop and waiting for this thing. And so for me, that was a really powerful thought. I think it's very different, of course, your lived experience and having had it happen. But even when it's happened, I think it's just really, it's almost a human deep reaction to trauma to be waiting for the other shoe to drop, and to acknowledge that with compassion, not beating ourselves up, but saying, oh, of course I'm hesitant. And when you see it, we often talk about this in mindfulness, when you notice it, you can change it. If you don't notice it, then you can't change it. So I think it's a really powerful lesson. Also thinking that delight is a counterbalance to pain and sorrow and joy, and that we actually need both in our life. So the yin and the yang, or the darkness and the light, or the Buddha talks about the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows. And I love this thought that the Aztecs believed that the god Quetzalcoatl gave chocolate to humankind to make up for the pain of having to live on Earth. Because for me, chocolate is truly delightful. And so now that I am aware of that quote, I'm going to take even more delight in it. And perhaps by not delighting in it and just moving through it and not eating it mindfully, for example, I'm missing out on the whole point. So I think this idea of allowing ourselves to experience delight. So in contrast to the pain and the sorrow, that we need both, and both are fully acceptable and both are fully expected. And I have worked with a friend and colleague who always uses this term, full spectrum living. And the idea of full spectrum living is that you need the opposites. You need the delight and joy and the sadness and the pain, and that a life well lived includes both. And imagine if you just lived in neutral all the time, how unpleasant and gray and boring that would be. And so that it's actually the contrast between the highs and the lows. And so not allowing yourself the delight and not fully living and experiencing mindfully the pain, you're actually missing out. And that is the The contrast is the best word I can think of between those two. So acknowledging that delight is something that has to be allowed, and you have to give yourself permission. And sometimes that's not as easy as it sounds. It sounds very easy. Oh, just allow yourself to have fun or allow yourself to delight. But for many of us, it's work and a skill and a practice. And I wanted to share this idea that delight and fun are learned. And I wrote a year ago a post about how fun is learned. And it came from a quote that was shared at my husband's aunt's 70th birthday. And she is the most fun person I know and always has been. She's the one who dresses up as the Easter Bunny and is always making jokes and this and that. And her life partner said, well, it's actually something that you have to know how to do. And so that Aunt Jeannie is the one who knows how to have fun. But there is a cat in the hat quote that says, it's fun to have fun, but you have to know how. And so realizing when I heard this, that I didn't actually know how to have that much fun. I was an expert at working really hard and taking care of people and fixing people. And that had always been my role in life. And that I could practice this other skill and bring it into my life and learn how to do it. It's just like mindfulness, and fun and delight, as we've talked about, come from being in the moment and practicing non-judgment and noticing all tenets of mindfulness. I will say there's a little bit of conflict here as I bring it up around non-striving, because would you be striving to have fun or not striving? But I think actually, in order to have the fun, you have to stop striving. And so it's a little bit of a double entendre there, but just allowing yourself to be in the moment and realizing that happiness and fun actually come from how you think about it, from your intention to do it, your willingness to experience it and to be in the moment, and to notice that other people outside you don't have to change to have fun. And it's really within you that when you commit to doing this and commit to perhaps even feeling uncomfortable, because sometimes letting go and just being in the moment is uncomfortable, that you will and can experience much more fun. And that is a choice about how you want to experience the world. So in the Book of Delights, Ross, I don't know how to say his last name, Gehi, talks about practicing delight and noticing delight every day. And it's like a muscle, just like we talk about the muscle of mindfulness, and that delight doesn't just arrive, you have to go looking for it. So I would encourage you all to consider that. How can you look for it? How can you create it? How can you allow what's right in front of you to be delightful? And what is it that works for you? Noticing that for Ni Chang, stillness works for her to see delight. And for me, movement works. And maybe it's not the same each time, but just noticing when you have had delight in the past and what works for you to help you tap into that part of you.
I think it's delightful that you quoted a children's book. So I wanted to touch upon judgment that might arise surrounding the belief possibly of not knowing how to have fun, or when others tell you that you can't or don't have fun. So I'm going to invite you to notice when judgment arises around fun and experiencing delight, and perhaps being curious with the origins of this judgment, but not necessarily blaming or being hard on oneself, not getting entrenched into the storylines or the thoughts of the why, but really being open and honest about the origins of the judgment related to the belief that you don't know how to have fun or that you can't have fun, or this accusation. So asking yourself, is it true? Is it false? Is it partially true or sometimes true? And then challenging it really and asking yourself, what if it is or isn't? So hoping that these questions can help you work through any judgment that arise surrounding fun and delight, that this curiosity can oftentimes soften judgment. And so that this reflection becomes an opportunity for you to learn something about yourself or the other person that's kind of accusing you.
and that you might be, I'll put in quotes, accusing yourself of being someone that doesn't have fun or can't have fun or doesn't know how. And if you let go of that judgment, might you see where you do have fun? It just looks different than perhaps the way you think you should. I've talked a lot recently about this idea of our manuals for ourselves. And we sometimes think fun has to be, gathering with another group of people, for example. But for some people, fun is sitting on the top of a mountain, drinking their coffee all by themselves. And so that fun and delight can be found in all kinds of circumstances. There's no right way to experience delight.
I think it's so situational, and it comes upon us in many unexpected ways if you're open to it. And in terms of being open to it and noticing, that's where mindfulness can come in and help strengthen that muscle of awareness, of attention, of noticing. The other aspect I wanted to touch upon was about the attachment to, or the clinging to, in general, pleasant events. And I would label delight as a pleasant event. And so reminding you that we have a tendency to want to hold on to what's pleasant, to what's we have labeled as good. And that in and of itself, when we cling so hard, when we are attached to a positive situation or a positive outcome, that in and of itself can cause suffering. And so when that pleasant event or that delightful situation has ended, then there can be some sorrow or remorse or regret, which can also bring up suffering. And again, I want to bring up this palms wide open approach of mindfulness, of letting whatever situation that is here for you now, delightful or otherwise, to gently basically be on your palms so that you're not grasping with closed fists, and that you're not resisting by pushing away negatively labeled events. Can you simply let a situation be just as it is atop your palms, because the situation's already here, and all the thoughts and feelings and body sensations that you have surrounding that situation already present for you now? So simply letting it be, allowing and accepting, is one way that you could potentially help reduce the suffering that comes from clinging and attachment to pleasant events.
And the negative of negative events, just sort of, because sometimes what might seem like a negative event actually can have some delight in it. Thinking about, a conversation you might have with a teenager or a young adult about something that might be negative, but the connection, if you allow yourself to just be in the moment and not attached to either way that the conversation might go, there actually is delight in that connection and delight in that growth and delight in that learning. And that sometimes we may miss delight when we don't approach it with hands wide open by deciding it's one or the other experience beforehand. So grasping to either can get us into a spot. And in this conversation about delight, I had thought particularly, and I think this is true for many, that mindfulness is supposed to be serious. And so we wanted to bring delight into mindfulness because mindfulness in and of itself can, of course, create delight. It can help us enjoy the delight. And it doesn't have to be a non-delightful experience, is what I'll say. It doesn't have to be anything, but that I think when we think about mindfulness and meditation and doing it in a certain way, that many people think of it as a serious endeavor. So I decided that delight is part of mindfulness, and mindfulness is key to be able to experience delight because it puts us in the moment. And when I thought about that phrase, it occurs to me that when I teach yoga and I bring people into mindfulness, if you look on my YouTube channel at the yoga classes that are by far the most popular, they are all the ones that are about buoyancy, being happy, shining, finding lightness. And so that we're all wanting to experience this and looking for a path to do so. And that mindfulness is one tool that really allows us to get there. And so this idea that we can be playful, and even within meditation and even within mindfulness, can be a really beautiful thing. And I think in our American society, so many things are to be serious. We should be serious. We need to do this to accomplish X. And so it doesn't have to be like brow furrowing or a right way to practice. And even when we focus the attention or bring our mind back or come back to our sit bones, what if it's just like a gentle, happy suggestion? Or, we call them cues, which cues are not directions. They're literally just like a suggestion or an offering. And so realizing that mindfulness is not about sitting still and paying attention. It's about enjoying and experiencing. And as a pediatrician and a mom, I teach kids yoga also. There's so many things in kids meditation that sometimes I think adults can tap into, whether it's like starfish meditation or blowing bubbles, or there's lots of exercises where you tap into the fun of mindfulness, and realizing that mindfulness can be fun, and it can help you have fun, and it can help you see where you have fun and you're missing having fun. So just offering that we don't have to be so serious about it all, and that it's part of the solution to having fun is being mindful.
So practicing mindfulness, even seriously, or perhaps with some lightness, using either a guided or an unguided practice, recognizing that the guidance in a guided meditation is always an invitation to approach a practice a certain way. And so recognizing that whatever the practice unfolds for you in that particular moment, and realizing that if you do the same guided practice one day compared to a different day, that the experience is going to be different, most likely. All of this formal practice can help build that mindfulness muscle. It can build our capacity to notice, to pay attention, so that when delight arises, we can show up for it wholly. We can show up with it with brain and body, our mind, body, and spirit in the same place at the same time.
And realizing that when we practice mindfulness, we notice delight. And so to think about how delight could actually be everywhere if you start looking, but that it's found in the noticing, and it's found in the intention. There's delight in nature. There's delight in the birds. There's delight in eating, not just the chocolate. There's delight in relationships. And for me, looking at small children is a really beautiful spot to notice how delight can come into our world. And we often think that small children learn from watching us, but perhaps we can learn from watching them. They have let go of a lot of the judgments and the angst and the expectations and show up in the moment, and they experience so much more delight.
I think one foundational attitude of mindfulness that young children embody so well, they are experts at this, is beginner's mind. And they're experts at this without even realizing it. But if you notice and you watch children closely when they are experiencing delight or when they're experiencing something for the first time, it's exemplary. With my own daughters, having been with them, going to a new playground for the very first time and seeing the wonderment and the sheer joy and excitement of being there, especially since this last year with COVID and a lot of closures of recreational areas initially, and seeing that delight, even at a playground that they've been to countless times, but hadn't been to in a long while. Or the curiosity and gentleness of meeting one of our new bunnies for the first time, that squeal of delight. There can be a childlike innocence that's embodied with beginner's mind, seeing every experience and experiencing everything as if for the first time, bringing us closer to being able to notice delight. So we wanted to close our podcast with some reflection questions. How can you notice delight?
When have you had times of delight in your life?
When would you like to have delight?
How can you create delight? Can you listen to your heart and allow yourself to dance your heart? May you all notice and create much delight in the week ahead. We encourage you to reach out to find out more about working with us, to learn and develop these tools and skills so you can have more delight. What might you miss out on if you don't? Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the podcast, leave us stars and reviews and follow and subscribe. And please share it with others who you think might enjoy or benefit. And stay on after the singing bell for a mindful moment. As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or up-level your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely. Welcome to this mindful moment. In mindfulness-based stress reduction, there is a teaching concept of the circle of awareness practice. And it's a construct which allows us to lean into our experiences. And I like to guide you through one about leaning into delight. So inviting you to close eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you, sitting wherever you are in a position of comfort. Begin by grounding yourself into this present moment by perhaps noticing the support of the ground beneath your feet or the points of contact between you and the supporting surface. As you're ready, bringing into your mind's eye the experience of a delightful situation that perhaps recently happened. Recounting some of the events that happened during this delightful experience. And moving through the circle of awareness, of noticing thoughts. Are you able to recount any thoughts that you had during that delightful event? Noticing the thoughts as clouds passing through the sky or leaves drifting down a stream, witnessing the thoughts that you had about or during that delightful event, and even now as you recount it. Next, moving on to emotions. What emotions arose for you during that delightful event? What emotions arise for you in the recounting of it? Naming the emotions that you noticed or are noticing now. And as you're ready, shifting to wondering about body sensations. When that delightful event was happening, did you know that it was a pleasant experience for you in the body? And if so, how did you know? What kind of body sensations were you having during this delightful event? And what body sensations are present for you now, recounting, thinking back to the delightful event? And next, were there any behaviors that happened during the delightful event that were emblematic of patterns of behavior of any clinging or attachment or wanting that delightful event to last longer than it did? Or was there spaciousness and curiosity and a willingness and freedom to let that delightful event pass just as it did? And noticing what's here for you now, going through that circle of awareness, leaning into delight practice. Perhaps this circle of awareness meditation can help you explore life's experiences in a deeper, more mindful way. Thanks for practicing, blinking open eyes, letting the light back in.